We're nothing if not punctual. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. If anyone doesn't know, I'm Paul Christensen. I'm an associate professor in anthropology at HSA, along with Dr. Stam. We are both very thrilled to welcome Dr. Benjamin Bartlett. He's an assistant professor of political science at Miami University, Rose-Hulman. Now, I've known Dr. Bartlett for several years, and immediately upon meeting him, I thought this would be an ideal person to bring to our campus for several reasons. He has a Hoosier connection. His undergraduate work was done at Earlham College. So our former rival, do we still call them a rival or not? At least in football.
Athletic.
Yeah. He majored in computer science there. He then began this kind of interesting, somewhat unusual academic journey. Earned a master's degree in computer science from the University of Toronto. And then I'll say saw the light, but I should also know my audience, right? Maybe not. Turn to the social sciences, specifically political science, doctoral work at UC Berkeley. All of which means he's expertly suited to navigate this too often yawning gap between the technical and the social sciences in any number of ways. Dr. Bartlett's work examines cybersecurity policy, international relations in East Asia, Japanese politics, and the interaction between economic and security policy more broadly. I'm going to be speaking about those areas of scholarly focus, as well as his unique background, how all of these things came together. So, please help me welcome Dr. Bartlett to Rose-Hulman.
Now I can skip the part of this where I was going to explain who I am, because Dr. Christensen has already done that for me. So that was a time saver. Thank you. All right, so it's a pleasure to be here today. It's great seeing you all out here. You could be playing video games, but you're here listening to me instead, so I appreciate that. Basically, when I was trying to come up with this talk, Dr. Christensen was like, you have to, you should throw some technical stuff in there to, know your audience, I guess. So I'm doing my best. And he also told me that I had to come up with my own title. And I was like, oh, man. So as I was staring out the window, being tempted to let ChatGPT do it for me, which I did not do. This is my own. I was like, well, what's something that's kind of, going to get at the point of my talk, but also be a little bit, techie. I was like, all right, what about this idea of, being random, right? And I came to this actually backwards because I was thinking, okay, well, what am I talking about? I'm talking about kind of switching paths in lives where I was kind of in a place that was a good place. Like things weren't bad, but I, decided to kind of take a leap and do something else and try and find something even better, right? So I'm thinking, okay, well, that's like being on a local maxima, right? For those of you computer scientists, and like then trying to find sort of the even, bigger maximum, the real maximum. And so I thought, well, anytime you got an algorithm where you do that, you do it by adding a little randomness in there, right? So simulated annealing, you're going to jump a bit. Genetic algorithms, which might even be more fitting, since I'm going to talk about mixing stills together, you have some randomness in there. So that's kind of where this idea of this talk came from, right? Have just sort of a little random leaps in your life so that you can find like your own sort of optimal situation. So basically what I'm going to talk about here right today is sort of how do I go from being, a computer science student, which was a lot of fun, to being a, professor of political science, which is a kind of completely different thing, who studies Japan, right? So forget that international stuff in there, since that's why I'm here. And so, basically what I really want to do, though, is kind of, you just want to hear about my life, as I'm sure interesting as that is. I was like, what are some like kind of actual lessons that I could take from that would maybe be helpful to college students? So, I thought I'm going to go with sort of three things, some of which you've probably heard before, maybe all of which you've heard before, but hopefully this will reinforce the point, right? First, and like this is one that everyone says, but it is true and will certainly help me in life, is, do things that are kind of outside your comfort center, right? I love tech, I love computer science, I programmed all the time, but as we talked about, right, like, as I will talk about, it was kind of doing some other things, during my college career that kind of eventually led to my current career. And things that at the time I didn't think of as part of a career at all. They were just kind of fun, interesting things to try, right? Second, be open to kind of changing your careers or life paths, if things aren't completely working out, if you're not totally happy, right? I mean, obviously, right, if things are a complete disaster, you should really look into it. But like, as I'll talk about in my own life, right, I actually basically liked my job when I switched careers. It was actually a good job. It just wasn't quite what I was looking for in life. And, it was not, by sort of taking that leap, I kind of found something that I liked even better, even though my old job was really good. And third, basically, if like me, you do, it's sort of the opposite. If like me, you do end up leaving STEM, right, or engineering, computers, whatever, still remember you got those skills from your old life that you can put onto, your new life. Or the opposite direction, if you all stay in, STEM, which is also great, remember that, you might have these other skills from other parts of your life that you can like pull in and can give you sort of a competitive edge that you make sort of a unique contribution to like whatever field you're in, right? So those are kind of like the big three things I'm gonna, hopefully leave you with out of this talk. So let me just start here with like the very first lesson. Trying things outside of your comfort zone, right? So as hard as it is to imagine now, looking at me in my middle age, once upon a time I was like 18 or 19, so you can imagine that. And I'm heading in this college on the other side of Indiana, right? I guess what were at one point your rivals, perhaps not now. And I'm just kind of, going in there and like planning my life going forward, right? I'm like, what am I gonna do? And there are people who like go into college, right, not knowing like exactly what they want their major to be, right? And that's great. That was not me. I knew I wanted to do computer science. I love computers, right? I'd had a computer like when I was a kid, the Commodore 64. I programmed in BASIC on it. I was back on the internet before it was cool. I programmed on sort of like these online games at the time and all kinds of stuff, right? So I came in there, I'm like, I love computers. I want to be a computer scientist. I want to be a computer programmer. I just know I'm going to love computer science. And I got in there and I started taking computer science courses and I did love it. Like I spent a ton of time programming. I'd, work late into the night on programs. I'd like add new features that weren't even like part of the assignment because it was so fun to do it, right? So I feel like I really, really enjoyed what I was doing. It's maybe not great for my social life, spending all that time, hanging out with computers in the lab, but I really had a great time doing it. But, right, this was a liberal arts college, right? Earlham, makes you take stuff that's not in your major. So there were these general education requirements I also needed to fulfill. And one of those general ed requirements was a language requirement. And essentially the deal was this. If you came in and you didn't know any language at all, you had to take a full 2 semesters of whatever language. What if you came in, you could essentially test out of either part or all of that language requirement, right? And I had taken Spanish in like middle school and high school, and I wasn't like some sort of great Spanish speaker or anything, but I took like that test and like, they were like, if you want, you can just take like the 1 semester of Spanish and be done with it. And that was kind of tempting, right? Because that would leave me more time for what I really liked doing, which was taking these computer science courses. But at the same time, I was like, what? Like, I'm in college, I should try new things, right? Like, why don't I sort of see what else is in the category, right? And even though Earlham is a small school, it turned out one of the things they had was Japanese classes. And I'm like, all right, that seems interesting. Like, I was, super into like samurai movies. I've seen all like the Kurosawa movies and stuff. I was into like anime and manga. And this was like back in the day when like, if you wanted to read manga, you had to go to like the one comic bookstore like miles away that happened to have it in like the back shelves somewhere. Now you can get it like Barnes and Noble. But at the time it was very rare. And so I'm like, all right, I really like Japan. It seems cool. I grew up playing Nintendo, right? Why not learn Japanese? Seems like great. So I do, even though it's going to take me a year, I joined Japanese class. And what no one tells me, what I didn't know at the time, is that if you're an English speaker, Japanese is a way harder language to learn than Spanish is. I see some of you nodding your heads, so you know this. I did not know this. Throwing in one more computer science reference, going from English to Spanish is like going from like C++ to Python, right? Like, yeah, the syntax is different, but kind of like how you structure the program is the same. This was more like going from like English to Lisp, right? Like the entire way you think about how you write the thing is completely different, right? The entire structure, all of it, completely, different from English. So it took me a lot more time and effort, even more than the fact that it was 2 semesters. I just spent a lot more time and effort learning Japanese. I still sucked at it, than I would have spent doing Spanish. But it was really fun, right? It was really cool learning this new skill, this new language that I hadn't learned before. And even more than that, like, though I didn't know it, it actually set me up for what was an even better, more transformative experience, which is getting to study abroad in Japan. So this was not why I had taken it. But it turned out that because I had taken Japanese for a year, I was eligible to be on this sort of semester-long program in Japan, where I would live in this city actually called Morioka up in like the northeastern part of Japan. I'd live with this host family. I would help teach English in this middle school, right? And so this is going to be kind of a cool immersive experience. Now it had nothing to do with my major. Like nothing I did on that was going to help me with my major at all. But like, you know, I was an overachiever when it came to computer science classes. I'd already taken a bunch of them. I was going to be able to pull this trip off. And so I was like, you know what? Like, when am I ever going to get to do this again? I'd never been out of the US, right? And I'm like, when am I going to get a chance to like live in another country like ever again in my life? Because again, at this time, right, my plan is like after I'm done with this, I'm going to like probably California or somewhere, being a computer programmer. Like I might take a week-long vacation now and again somewhere, but I'm going to like live abroad ever again. That was my thought at the time. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot, right? And I'm not going to lie, it was actually a really difficult experience. Right? I mean, living with this family, I can't really communicate with them. Like my Japanese was enough, like I could introduce myself and be like, I like video games, and that was about it. And, you know, completely different cultural expectations. And I was completely, essentially cut off my family and friends because, like, remember this, like, they don't have the internet at this house that I'm living, right? Like, this is back in the old days. Now I go to Japan, I'm like chatting with people on my phone, right? Like, whatever, but FaceTiming, you name it. But at the time, that was not a thing. There was a lot of culture shock, right? It was really hard. There's sometimes I woke up and was like, why am I here? But it was also like a really cool experience. Like, obviously, like I got to, you know, see what it was like to live, you know, in a completely different place than, you know, I live, right? See how Japanese families handle things. I got to eat a lot of food that I had never seen before. Because at the time, you know, Americans knew sushi, but like ramen, everyone thought was like cup noodle, right? Like that's now like everywhere. I could get a ramen thing in like my local town, but at the time, no one knew what that was. I ate that. I did all kinds of cool stuff. I got to like participate in like these festivals. Like one of them, I'm embarrassing enough, was just wearing like basically underwear and nothing else, and like carrying this like big boat into the middle of a river and filled with fireworks, and we lit it on fire and shot fireworks in there. It's awesome. So all this really cool experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I could lie and say, wow, that completely changed my life direction right there, but it didn't. Right? I came back home and I was like, that was great. I didn't even take Japanese again after that. I was like, I'm a computer scientist. I'm going to go back into programming. That having been said, right, even if I had done nothing else with Japan ever again in my life, which clearly is not the case, you guys know how this story ends, that experience still would have been worth it. Like, that was amazing. Hard, but amazing. All right. So that covers our first lesson, right? Try things outside your comfort zone. You never know. Like, you got to learn new things, have some cool things, right? Next, right, don't be afraid of changing sort of career or life paths, right? If it's not totally working out for you. So again, fast forward 7 or 8 years now, I'm older, I'm in like my mid-20s somewhere. I am living in Los Angeles. I'm working for a small startup that was working on actually statistical machine translation. One of the things I was doing was helping produce better language models, which like clearly there was no future in that whatsoever. I haven't seen any technologies involving language models recently. But actually, you know, mainly what I was working on at the time was actually automating systems, which was actually a really fun challenge. Basically, because we were creating these translation models, you know, we have to create language models and translation models and do all this other stuff. And kind of like our scientists, or whatever you want to call them, who were working on that, they have to try a bunch of different experiments, right? They'd be like, well, let's try like a bunch of different ways of creating this language model with a bunch of different features. And then once we find the best one, we can then do the next step, you know, using that as the input, and we'll try a bunch of experiments there. And the whole process they were doing it by hand. It's taking them forever. So my job was basically, I wrote a whole, you know, program that you could put in a configuration file, and it would just let you run a bunch of experiments. Like in parallel, it would look at the output of those experiments, you know, based on some criteria. It would pick the best one. It would then move on to the next stage by itself. So it would take you all the way from the beginning to sort of the end product that you ship off to the customer, right? And that was a really fun project to work on, actually. It was really complicated. It was originally supposed to go to someone else, but I just sort of took it over myself. And I enjoyed doing it. I got to learn some new skills, which if you're a computer scientist is always fun. Like the final product, the last little bit all had to be done on Windows. Up until that, it was Linux. So I had to teach myself PowerShell so I could kind of get that last bit done. So it was a really cool job. I was enjoying it. The people I worked with were good. My boss was a super cool guy. He'll come on to this story again. We even, like, this is LA, our office even like overlooked the Pacific Ocean. I could bike in because it was beautiful weather every day. It was like a good place to be, right? But at the same time, like, I was kind of getting bored. I was actually talking about this. Dr. Christensen was saying earlier, like, he doesn't like coming in the office every day. He hates that idea. That was basically my problem. I was like, man, I'm coming in, like, it's a cool job, but like, I'm coming in the same office every day, 9 to 5. I'm like sitting in front of this desk, kind of like, starting to think maybe I want to do something else. And at the same time, like, Japan kind of been in the back of my mind this whole time. And I, started taking like some extension classes of Japanese at UCLA. It was like maybe once a week. Like, I wasn't really getting that much better at Japanese, but it was fun. I was making some friends that way. And I was kind of like, oh, man, maybe there's some way I can start looking at Japan again, bring that back into my life somehow, right? And during those 7, 8 years, sort of out of the left field, I'd also become kind of more interested in politics, right? Because as you can see, I'm a professor of political science, which as an undergrad, I was not interested in at all. I took like one political science class because they made me. I think I got like a beat it at best. And I had no interest in, doing any of it ever again. But over those 7 or 8 years, just I'm a guy who reads a lot of things. I just like to read. And I've been reading, among other things, a lot of blogs and some books on sort of politics and how politics works, and especially how international politics works. I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. But I was like, well, how do I learn more about this? So once again, I jumped over to UCLA Extension, which, again, extension classes are awesome if you later are working. If you want to learn in your school and meet some people, it's a great way to do it. Pitching that. But I start taking classes on political science. And this time, unlike the first time, I actually really enjoy them. And I do well in them. I'm like, this seems kind of cool. Maybe I could like make a job, something politics, something Japan. Yeah, this could work. So I started thinking, well, maybe I want to do graduate work in political science in Japan. But like, I'm still not 100% sure, right? Like, I don't really know anything about what grad school for political science looks like. So what I do is, again, I look at UCLA's extension, and it turns out that if you can get permission from the professor, which they don't care, so they were happy to give it to me, you can take graduate courses at UCLA through the extension system. So I'm like, great. What I will do is I will take graduate courses in political science, specifically international relations. Now, the great thing about graduate courses is this. They only meet like once a week. The bad thing is they met during my normal work hours. So this is where my cool boss comes back in. So I go to my boss and I'm like, hey, boss. I didn't call him boss. I called him William because that was his name, but let's pretend we'll call him boss. Hey, boss. I'd really like to, take this class like once a week, but like, could I get somehow like half a day off once a week to take this thing? It's like, here's the thing. You come in Saturday mornings to like make up for it. I'll let you take like the half day off for that, day you want to take the class. I'm like, great, that works for me. I mean, it's actually really nice. I come in Saturday mornings, no one else there. It's really quiet. Great time to get some programming done. Got my view of the ocean. So that's what I did. I was like, all right, I'll take some courses. I will try these grad courses out. I'll see if I like them. I actually really did like them. I was really enjoying sort of all the discussion about international relations and all of those things. And so I'm like, all right, this whole thing kind of seems to be working out. So I basically go back to my boss and I'm like, hey, I'm applying for graduate school. And he's like, great, tell me how it goes. I applied to a number of different schools because that's what you do when you're applying to graduate school. And I get into, among others, UC Berkeley. I'm like, that's a good school. So I'll go there. It's also just up the coast. So that was convenience. So long story short, right, I make this sort of dramatic career switch where I go from being a computer programmer working in Los Angeles to being a graduate student in Berkeley. And my cool boss gives me a really nice going away speech and all that. And it was great. Now, obviously, right, like, that was a pretty dramatic career switch. Like, not every one of you are going to make quite that dramatic a career switch. But it's still worth thinking about, right? Like, if you're not totally satisfied with what you're doing, like, maybe it's just like you switch to some other aspect of, if you're a computer programmer, programming, or you start doing a more managerial position, or you, start doing it again, sort of, maybe you go and work as a programmer in another country, right? The point is there's just all kinds of different opportunities out there, and you should be open to taking them if you're not, 100% satisfied with where you are. So let's turn on to like the last lesson then. So the last lesson, and this one, the other two I learned, by essentially kind of accidentally getting things right. This one I learned by getting things wrong, but then having my advisor point it out to me. So the last one is don't forget about if you leave STEM your field, like the competitive advantage those STEM skills give you, or vice versa, you stay in STEM, try and think about kind of what other skills you can bring in that might give you some sort of unique advantage, let you kind of carve out a unique space in whatever your field may be. So basically what happened was this. In a lot of ways, I was partway through grad school now. Actually, I've been in grad school a while. And things were going pretty well. But I decided when I went to grad school that I was going to kind of move away from my tech background entirely. I was like, you know what? Yes, I've got this background in tech. Yes, I could be, looking at computers and bringing my computer skills into it. But I really got to move in another direction, right? Not only do I not want to do like political science, I don't even want to do like the kind of political science where you're working on like big statistical data sets and running computers on them, which is one field of political science that definitely exists. I want to be like the one that's sort of like you're on the ground, you're talking to people, you're kind of seeing what's really happening in the real world. So that was my idea. So that's what I do. I switch over and I'm like, I'm going to go to Japan. Well, first I'm going to learn Japanese. So I spent several years in graduate school picking that particular skill up, which that was hard, but my Japanese is much better now. And then I'm going to go to Japan, spend time there. I'm going to be interviewing people like politicians, bureaucrats, etc., about kind of what they want, what they're thinking about, how their politics is working. And I'm going to like take that and I am going to, write about it. Like that was my big idea. And for the most part, all of that was working pretty well. I learned Japanese. I got funding to go spend a couple of years living in Tokyo. I got to eat a lot of good food again. All that was really good. But there's a slight problem, which is that in order to get your PhD, you have to finish this thing called a dissertation, which is this giant thing you write that you then pray you never have to look at again in your entire life. And so the problem was that I had decided to, write on this topic, which was essentially territorial disputes, right? So basically all that is this like when two countries disagree about who owns something. And Japan, right? I wanted to do Japan, and Japan conveniently for me has three of these. It's got an island dispute with Russia, it has an island dispute with China, and it has an island dispute with South Korea. So I'm like, great, plenty for me to write about. And then as I get to working on it, I realize I have a problem, which is that lots of other people are also writing about this thing. And they've all had really smart things to say about it. And I don't even I'm like, where would I even add to this? Like, I don't have anything like new or interesting that I really want to say about this stuff. And I struggled with this for a while. Like, I'm just like, I'm working at it. I'm talking to my advisor. It's just like going nowhere. So one day my advisor pulls me aside. He's like, look, Ben, here's the thing. I know you came into this and you're like, I'm going to get as far away from my tech background as I possibly can. But lately I've, started working on kind of cybersecurity policy stuff. He was a political economist who was looking at basically how does like the US and other countries invest in cybersecurity, right? That was his thing. And he's like, and I go to these conferences, I talk to these political scientists about cybersecurity, and it's clear a lot of them don't really understand like any of the technical aspects of it at all, right? It's like, there's just like a clear knowledge gap here. And it's also a very hot topic in political science, right? Like people care about this issue. So here's just an idea, right? You've got this computer science background. You would probably understand the whole cybersecurity thing. And so maybe, just saying, maybe write about that instead. And I'm like, well, this ain't working, so I may as well try it. So I start looking at the literature, and I look to see what people are writing about. And it turns out a lot of people, very few people are writing about cybersecurity policy in general. And to the degree that they are writing about it, they're mostly writing about it in the United States, right? And I'm like, all right, that does seem like a gap, right? Because there are a lot of other countries and they're handling this differently. And I happen to speak the language of one of those countries, which is Japanese. So why don't I write about Japanese cybersecurity policy? And so that's exactly what I do. So I go back to Japan. I interview different people now about, sort of people who are working on cybersecurity policy, bureaucrats, politicians, people from the private sector. And I come back with that new information And within like a year, I finished my dissertation and I'm out the door, right? So my advisor's advice was very good. Listen to your advisors. So the thing here is like, what I want to highlight, right, is that what let me do this, and this has sort of now become my brand. I mean, Professor Christensen will tell you, right, like I'm like the Japan cybersecurity guy, that's me. Anytime that anyone wants like Japan cybersecurity, they, reach out to me. And how I did this, right, was because I had a couple of different pieces of comparative advantage here, right? A couple different skills. One, right, obviously was this tech background, right? There aren't that many people in the political science sphere who really understand anything about cybersecurity. That having been said, right, there aren't none either, right? There are people who do write on cybersecurity who have some understanding of it, right? So that alone would have helped. But what really kind of let me carve out this unique space was the fact that not only did I understand some of the technical aspects of it, but I also, spoke Japanese and had spent a bunch of time in Japan, right? And there aren't that many American political scientists who both understand cybersecurity and can speak Japanese. That is probably me, maybe one other guy. And so it's, that was really what let me carve out like this really unique space for myself, right? Was this combination of kind of unusual talents. And so that I think is kind of, what I want to pitch to you, right, is that essentially, if you are, right, of course, leaving STEM, right, then by all means, right, you should take some of those STEM skills, right? Those are going to give you an advantage in whatever field you end up in. But vice versa, right? Even if you are in STEM, like if you're a computer scientist, if you're whatever, right? Like those background skills those other skills you may have learned along the way can really help you. Like language skills are great if you're going to do anything internationally, obviously, right? Like Japanese has helped me a lot. I actually have a friend who's gone the opposite direction. He did a Japanese studies major and now works for VMware in Japan, right? So you can go either direction with that one. But there's also, right, I know a story about a guy who was a cybersecurity guy, and his like special skill was that he could speak really like business speak essentially, right? Like he could talk to CEOs in a way they would understand. And he took those communication skills and he's made a career out of it because like the problem always is like there's a cybersecurity guys who like, need like equipment and, various software and, whatever, need new hires. And they have to tell this to the CEO who can only understand things in terms of money, right? And the CEO is like, well, I see the spending here, but what's the advantage, right? What's the bonus? And this guy could communicate like those risks that he would be taking otherwise, the CEO would be taking others, or he would be taking otherwise, right? And turn that into like, this is how much money it's going to cost you if, something goes wrong. And the CEO would be like, okay. And the guy be like his entire living, just like, I'm going to be like that guy who just communicates between the CEO and the cyber people, right? So the point is, right, like you can have, this mix of skills can really let you carve out this unique space. And like I've gotten to do like really cool things because obviously go to Japan and eat good food a lot, right? But also just like by being like the Japan cyber guy, for example, I got invited to work on this white paper on like basically how the US and Japan can cooperate on building a cybersecurity workforce. I had to work with like people from like Microsoft and like cybersecurity companies and stuff, and like be like this academic in there. I'm like, hey, and that was just like a neat experience, right? Like you get to do kind of cool stuff if you're like the unique individual and all of that. All right, so kind of as like my final pitch, those are my 3 lessons. One of my sort of final bit is just like, how does the computer science background help me anyway? Right? Like, what? I'm a political scientist. What am I even doing with this, computer science in my everyday life? Sadly, I'm not like writing my own 0-day exploits and making tons of money. That would be fun, but no, I'm not that good. Instead, right, I say it helps me in a few ways. One, I mean, most obviously, if you're going to be researching, writing about cybersecurity, it really helps to kind of have that technical background to understand what you're reading, right? Like, I can read an incident report and understand, how the threat actor operated and sort of the various techniques they use, right? I can understand sort of what the policies are trying to address. I can also read like the policies and any standards and stuff. But again, I understand the technical aspects of that. And what that helps me do, since a lot of what I do is interview people, it helps me to go there and sort of ask the right questions, right? I can be like, hey, I walk in and I've read these papers, I've read these threats, I understand what's going on. And that tells me what I don't know, where I need to fill in the holes, right? And those are the questions I want to ask people. Because you don't want to just walk in and ask people in an interview a thing you could have gotten from a document somewhere. That's wasting everyone's time. But another thing, more broadly, it also helps me to avoid making mistakes in my analysis. Mainly, I just call it like a cyber BS detector. One problem with writing about cybersecurity in political science when people don't have a tech background is they think cyber is like this magical world where anything can happen. And there are limits, right, to what can happen in cyber. And it does let you kind of figure out when someone is saying something that like can't possibly be true. So just as one example, I'm not going to name names, but I was reading a paper, reading an article, not by me, about Japanese cybersecurity policy. And the guy claimed something that like, it was something like over 90% of all attempted breaches of computer systems in Japan succeed. And I'm like, there is no way that is true because, yes, you know, as anyone who knows anything about cyber knows, right? There are a lot of people of attacks that are nothing more than like, well, I'm going to see if there's any low-hanging fruit here, so I'm just going to like, you know, download some off-the-shelf software, right? I'm just going to run it against a bunch of computers and see if any of them happen to succeed, right? And that should be driving that number way down, right? There's no way like, oh, those sort of, you know, run by and try and hit the computer attacks are actually succeeding 90% of the time. And so I went back and looked at like the thing he cited, and sure enough, he completely misunderstood what it was saying, right? It was actually just talking about, it was really talking about something completely different. It was talking about the number of incident reports received and then the number that had been successfully responded to. So I'm not actually sure how that turned into number of computers broken into. But you can see, right, like just the fact that I knew something told me like that number couldn't be right, which I might not have caught on that if I didn't know it yet. But it's even, again, more helpful in terms of, I guess, where I really mostly use it is, again, with interviews when you're just trying to build rapport with people. And that happens in a couple of ways, right? One, again, right, there's that asking the right question thing. That's really important. But also, when you're asking that question, it's also really, really helpful to actually like kind of fill in, hint that you've got, you know, that technical expertise. So you start with like, I know, blah, 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 right? Which, you know, something you've read about in their policies and, you know, you can throw in the technical things. And then you ask the question. And the reason you do that is because when you first walk in and just ask, if you just ask the question right away, they have this stock answer that they assume you know nothing. So they have this stock answer that they're going to give you that's just completely shallow and that doesn't actually get like the deep, you know, the deep real answers that you're looking for, right? It's like they could be reading off of a PowerPoint for all that matters. Whereas if you can show them you've got that technical expertise right away, they're like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. I can skip all that, like, you know, PowerPoint stuff, and I can get to the real answer, right? So that's really helpful. The other thing it does in terms of building rapport is I found that just something about like tech person that transcends cultures. Like Japan and the US are very different cultures, but you're like, yeah, I'm a tech guy and you're a tech guy or girl or whatever, right? Like that can like really make a big difference, right? Because then you're like, there's something about like you're part of the same tribe at that point. It kind of builds trust and rapport. And again, they're just more inclined to talk to you then, and more inclined to kind of give you good answers. It's just sort of human nature. So again, just to sort of finish up, right? The idea is, you know, these STEM skills can help you even if you leave, you know, your current field, if you leave STEM. But, you know, if you stick with STEM, that's great too. There are going to be other skills that you're going to be able to bring in. They're going to help you. They're going to really, like, you know, let you have that kind of competitive advantage in whatever it is you end up doing. So again, just to wrap up with the 3 lessons I've learned that hopefully will help with all of you. Try things outside of your comfort zone, right? Don't be afraid to change careers or life paths, but also don't forget, over time, either direction you go, you'll build up these unique set of skills that you can really kind of combine in interesting ways to hopefully both get yourself kind of a more unique job, get some competitive advantage, maybe even get a bigger salary. Don't become a professor if that's what you want to do. Life tip. But also, you know, we'll let you make some sort of really, you know, unique contribution to whatever field you're in. And I think that's kind of really what we all want to do in life at the end, right? Just have sort of something where we can say like, yeah, I did that and maybe no one else could have. And I see I have talked faster than I expected, but that's all right. So I'm here for any questions people want to ask me. You can ask me about this. You can ask me about Japan. You can ask me about Japanese cybersecurity, whatever you want. Yeah.
So sorry for coming in a little tad late. I was working at the Learning Center. Was there anything that I missed during the first, like, I guess, 8-ish minutes there?
Just part of my life story. Nothing important at all. No, I was just talking about, I think the first 8 minutes would have been me talking about sort of trying things outside of your normal experience. I was just saying, I took Japanese, I went to Japan. That had nothing to do with my computer science degree, but obviously in the long run ended up affecting my life. Although at the time they were just kind of cool, fun things to do. Yeah.
My impression of like corporate, I guess, cyber operations within Japanese corporations is they like tend to be slow in adapting your technologies. Like you still have to fax things to people most of the time. Like how does that play into like what you do? I guess can you have some overview of this area? Yeah.
Great. So there are actually slightly two different issues there, right? So there's the issue of are they adapting cybersecurity and are they adapting new technologies? And the government's actually been working on trying to get them to do both. So there is actually within Japan now a digital ministry that they're literally their job. Well, first, part one of the job is getting the Japanese government to adopt these new technologies, which the Japanese government also does not want to do. Right? They also like their fax machines. They also don't want to put things on the cloud. They like writing things down in triplicate. Although I always joke that the best cybersecurity is like writing things down. No way to hack into paper. But nevertheless, right? So that is a big part of it. They are trying to get companies to adopt these new technologies, and they have a whole ministry devoted to that. And I have talked to the bureaucrats at that ministry, which is actually kind of a cool ministry because they took over like basically Yahoo Japan had these offices in this really nice part of Tokyo, and the digital ministry just like moved into those offices. So like every other bureaucracy ministry, it's like these little cramped cubicles, like stacked with papers. And this one, it feels like you're walking into a startup, or like it's like this beautiful open startup plan. Giant windows, like looking out and like just this beautiful view of Tokyo. I'm like, dang, you guys like won this game. So they are trying to do that. At the same time, right, they are trying to push companies to adopt cybersecurity, and Japanese cyber companies have been slower at that. For the most part, the bigger companies have now finally kind of caught on. Partly this was a fail and then, learn from failure, right? Like got hacked enough times essentially to realize, oh, this is actually really embarrassing. We better do something. But where they're still really struggling is with small and medium companies, right? They both it's a resource problem and an education problem, right? And so what's happening now is that they're trying, they are trying to focus more on this, but interestingly enough, a lot of the big companies so I guess let me back up. In Japan, unlike the US, where we just kind of like buy from, we're a company, I'm going to buy from whoever's cheapest. In Japan, what you tend to have between companies is these long-term relationships. We're like, I'm going to buy this widget from whatever Tanaka company, and I have bought that from them for 80 years. I'm planning on buying it from them for another 80 years, right? And what this means is you get these long-term relationships between suppliers and sort of the customers. And so a lot of the bigger companies have these long-term relationships with these smaller companies. And so now these bigger companies are actually trying to help these smaller companies with their cybersecurity. Because of course, they're in the supply chain, so it affects the big company too. Right? I mean, it is self-interested, but the fact that you're always going to be working with that same partner actually opens up these opportunities for like big and small cooperation that you don't necessarily have in a place like the US where you're like, well, your cybersecurity sucks, so I'm just going to go over here, right? So that's sort of an interesting difference. But that's really where right now the big difficulty is on those small and medium type industries. But you're at the fax machine, it's still pretty popular. I will say the other place it comes into my research is sometimes when I want to interview people, that's how I get in touch with them. I'm just sent a fax. So I've sent a lot of faxes in my life. Yeah.
So when you're preparing to sort of take a leap like that, like moving to Japan and all that,
Yeah.
How do you know, I guess you can't really know for sure, but how do you prepare for that so that it won't be like a massive mistake that you're unprepared for?
Yeah. So in my case, right, so that's a great question, right? And you can see I did some of that, right? When I was planning on sort of making that leap in the first place, right? Like I was like, okay, I don't want to just like apply to grad school and go to grad school, right? Because then it could be a huge disaster. And to be fair, sometimes it's just a disaster and you just leave and go back to what you were doing before. Like I definitely knew people who went to grad school, were there for 1 year and were like, no, and then like left and went and did something and went back to whatever they were doing before. So like I guess rule one is you can always go back, right? Like if it turns out to be a mistake, just be like, well, that was a mistake. I'll do what I was doing before. But two, like there are often ways you can sort of prepare the groundwork, right? So like you look for opportunities. In my case, right, I knew I wanted interest in grad school, so I took grad school courses. But maybe you're thinking about moving to another country. Well, just see if there's a way to spend like a month there or something first, right? See how you feel about it. and of course, part of it's going to depend on how flexible your job is, right? My boss was super cool and was flexible, so, and that made it easier, right? It's harder if your boss is not cool and flexible. But even just take a vacation there, right? Like, I mean, whatever you can do to kind of get that feeling for it before you decide to make that leap. But you're never going to, as you said, you're never going to know 100%. So just remember, sometimes you do something in life and it doesn't work out, and then you just say, well, that didn't work out, and you do something else instead. Yeah.
So I'm kind of like listening to how you are describing our Japanese companies, and it sounds like they are on average kind of slower moving technologically, but also like they've been around a lot longer, a lot of them. So do you see a pattern in modernization when they do finally move to newer technologies, that they are more often getting cybersecurity right the first time rather than jumping into things before the cybersecurity is well locked down?
So that's a great question. I guess I want to. Well, let me start with your first part, which is the slow down, adopt technology. That is true for like information technology. That's not necessarily true for all technology. They're faster when it comes to like manufacturing technologies for whatever reason. But yes, they're slow to adopt IT technologies. I do think that there are advantages of that second mover thing, right? Like being like, well, by the time they get around to it, they do have good models to copy, basically. So there is that sense of sort of getting it right the first time. And kind of actually thinking more broadly, getting back to this digital ministry that was asked about before, you're sort of seeing that same thing with Japan in general. Because one of the advantages that the digital ministry has as they're trying to move more towards e-government and trying to get more companies to adopt ideas, they can look at like the US and other countries that have kind of already done all that and see what mistakes what went wrong basically, and avoid those mistakes and adopt more models that do exist. And they do think that's kind of an advantage for them. So I think that is definitely you nailed something there. Yes.
Do you have any examples of like major, I guess, like hacks or breaches that like led to the cybersecurity policy that's
Oh yeah. The biggest one was there was this was embarrassing actually. So one easy one is in about 2014. So Japan passes its first like big cybersecurity law, basic law on cybersecurity. Japanese laws are kind of funny in that what they tend to do is they just, unlike our laws, which are like really specific, like we're like, here's every little thing you're gonna have to do. They tend to pass these like giant laws that are just like, we're gonna do X on cybersecurity, and then they just let the bureaucrats like figure out all the details. So they just tend to like give broad authorization to the bureaucrats. Well, what they had done in this case, when they'd given broad authorization to essentially help ensure the cybersecurity of purely public organizations, right? Pure government organizations. Now the problem is that Japan has these like kind of weird like semi-public organizations, and one of those semi-public organizations is their Japan Pension Fund, which is essentially their social security. And they had not given authority to anyone to sort of oversee the cybersecurity of these semi-public things. And not long after this bill passed, there was a hack in which someone got into the pension system and stole a bunch of information and leaked it. With that's like, it'd be like everyone's like government information being leaked publicly. Not a great moment. Was a huge scandal, all over the news. This is like one of the few things I've seen where like people have got really upset over like a cyber incident, and so they, not surprisingly, went back and revised the law very quickly to fill in that oversight to make sure that actually now they were going to oversee the semi-public ones as well. That's just one example of a half leading of that. Yeah.
with the semi-public ones, would they be kind of like contractors or?
No, so they're sort of hard to explain because they work. The idea is that you want to have these things that kind of work like private firms, but they're actually kind of part of the government. Like we don't really have them in the U.S., so it's like not easy to have an easy analogy. But like the idea is like you want something that kind of has the advantage of a private company, but really it's the government. But they have some separation from the government, and so like they're this like weird quasi entity where like they're kind of half in, half out. So they don't have like shareholders or anything, but they do have like more flexibility in terms of how they run themselves and like a government bureaucracy would have.
Dude, TEPCO is a good example.
Yes, TEPCO. What you want to explain TEPCO to them?
Do where's Peter? Where are you? Me? Oh, there you are.
Right in front of you. All right.
What is it?
Do we
We're getting there, but you mentioned it earlier.
I mentioned
Yeah, I thought you did. TEPCO's a big energy company, Tokyo Electric Power Company, right? They ran the reactor that melted down. Are they part of the government or not? They are and they aren't.
Yeah.
So, and then there's this dramatic scene, the prime minister barges in when the reactor's melting down. But who's exactly in charge? Is he in charge since he's the head of the government, or is the CEO of TEPCO in charge?
Yes.
Lack of clarity.
Yes. So then you can see how this becomes a problem with cyber as well. Yeah.
Then I think we've been mostly talking about like companies that are in sectors that are more traditional. Like, does being a high tech sector or like being energy help with their like internal IT, or they're still like kind of the same?
So the best is actually, well, I mean, obviously the telecom companies like NTT has like their own like cyber people and stuff, so they're good. So the telecom companies tend to be better, especially the big ones. Again, there's always a big small problem, and the other one is financial firms. Like they care, right? They care a lot. Someone breaks into, I mean, for the exact same reason, U.S. financial firms tend to have some of the best cybersecurity because basically, if your money gets stolen, it's their problem. It's similar in Japan, right? And so they do not want any kind of leaks. I had a bank account in Japan, and they actually like essentially had like kind of almost like a one-time pad for every time I logged in, which is like I've never seen that high security on a bank account before. It's pretty cool. If I lost that card though, I was screwed. But pretty interesting.
We can do one or two more. Go for it.
We haven't heard from you yet, so let's go for it.
So you talked about Japan, your interest in the culture. I was just curious then, what made you come back to America after and leave just like then do a career in America and not just settle in Japan?
The first time or the second time?
Second.
Second time, yeah, okay. Because first time is because, let me tell you, it's way better to be a computer programmer in America than Japan. The salaries are better, the perks are better, the hours are better. Japan's been a wonderful place. I would not want to work as a programmer there particularly. So the second time, it's in some ways, it's how do I put it? The U.S. hegemony when it comes to even education. It is much more prestigious to be a professor at a university in the United States than it is to be one in Japan. It is very easy if I decide later that I do want to be a professor in Japan to move that direction. It would be very hard if I decided to be a professor in Japan to move in this direction. And so just kind of pragmatically speaking, I still get to, I go to Japan once or twice a year, often for weeks or a month at a time. So I'm often spending like 2 months out of the year in Japan anyway. So I'm not like missing Japan too much. But it's just that one way left me with more options than the other way, basically.
One more, last one. Go ahead there.
So with the ones that you talked about that were semi-public, is there a term for those, like either in Japanese or?
Oh, there is, but I'm trying to remember what it was off the top of my head. Help me out here, Paul. I'm also blanking. There is a term for it, and I'm completely blanking on what that term is. But yes, they have a term for it both in English and in Japanese. But I get so used to using the shorthand of semi-public that I've forgotten what the actual term is.
Oh, Hangokai.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hangokai. Basically, semi-public.
Semi-public.
There you go. So it's semi-public in Japanese as well. My shorthand is correct in either direction. Excellent. I like to know that I'm actually on top of my Japanese and not just accidentally falling into the right answer.
Since we're obsessed with 50-minute time windows at Rose-Hulman, and we're at 50 minutes, can we thank Dr. Bartlett?